Well, good morning and happy Mother's Day to all you mothers out there. I am a mother too. I think we have a picture of me as a new mom with Wolf, my oldest. That's me, about 25 years old. Wolf was probably 6, 7 months old. And, he actually called earlier this week and said, "Hey, Mom, what would you like for Mother's Day?" And I said, I would really love a day off, but instead I'm here preaching, and then I get to go home and finish Felix's project and build a old school general store. So thank you, Craig and Felix, for that. You two can get together and figure out a nice gift for me to give me later tomorrow. But seriously, there's not a better place I would rather be than here with you guys. Now, being a new mom is tough. You're sleep deprived. You've got this little human that you're in charge of, and you have no idea what they want or need. All they do is cry. And at the same time, you're kind of thrown into this new environment and this new thing that you're doing. And there's still things that you want to do. And all the while you're taking care of this baby, this child, you're wondering, what am I doing? How am I going to contribute to the world? Am I still going to get to do those things I want to do? Like, what am I going to do for the kingdom of God? But here's the deal. I want you guys to look at the screen. We have a photo. Your greatest contribution to the kingdom of the world, or the kingdom of God, may not be something you do, but someone you raise. Moms, remember this. Take it to heart. Those long nights, those nights of rocking those babies that seemed like they will never end, those teenage years that seem to fly by, they're all worth it. God entrusted these kids to you for a reason. And those kids, they won't just be the church one day. Those kids are the church today, and so are you. So keep going. You're doing a great job. And because we want you guys to remember that, that's our gift for you today. On your way out, be sure to grab one of those prints. Now, when you have kids, especially for the first time, everybody and their cousin wants to give you advice. Even people who don't even have kids or don't even like kids. It's like you have this sign on you that says, "Hey, give me all your unsolicited advice. I want to hear it all." And so since we're going old school, I went to Google to find some old school parenting tips. And I have a few I'm going to share with you guys today. The first one, let's go ahead and show that photo. Give babies cereal beginning at 2 to 3 weeks and bacon and eggs at 9 weeks. All right, let's think about this for a moment. Bacon is awesome. Bacon is why I'm not a vegetarian anymore. But babies are lacking a key thing needed to enjoy this manna from heaven. What are they missing? Teeth. How is a 9-week-old going to enjoy bacon? Now, this next one is equally fascinating. It comes during a time when slide went up. So back then, when this came about, water was kind of dirty, and they deemed it not really safe to give to your infant. So instead, just fill your baby's bottle with beer. And if you're not a beer drinker, it's okay. Vodka or gin worked great too. Now, this next one happened during a time when people were moving to high-rise buildings, and they didn't have outdoor spaces. And so, to give your baby fresh air, do this. Put your baby in a cage and hang it out the window. Completely safe, right? Isn't that great? Now, these 3 parenting tips weren't the only crazy ones that I saw. And if you go to Google, you're going to find a lot of other ones. But there were also some old school tips I found that, they just hit home. And the one I want to share with you right now is more relevant today than I think ever. And it's not just a tip for parents, but a tip for everyone. So let's show it. Instill a respect for elders and everyone else. Teach kids that differences are what make the world beautiful and interesting. So, does this sound familiar? Any of you guys who have kids in school or your teachers, be kind. But it goes even further back than the 1950s when this photo was taken. It's exactly what Jesus tells us in the Great Commandment. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, who is that neighbor? I think a better question to ask ourselves is, who isn't our neighbor? Now, if you didn't grow up in church, you still have heard the story of creation. And most of us have heard the very first line in Genesis, which is the first line of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we've learned about how God created everything. He created the plants and the animals and the sun and the moon and the stars, and he created all of these things different, and all of these things to fulfill a purpose, his purpose. Even snakes and slugs and snails have a purpose. And when we look around us, we see the beauty of his creation. We go outside at night and we're in awe of the cotton candy sunsets. We go outside during a storm like last night as it rolls in, and we can feel the thunder and see the lightning, and we're amazed at the beauty and the power of it all. We take in all the differences and imperfections of what God created around us, and we see beauty in it until it comes to one thing, until it comes to each other. You know, how is it that you and I can look outside, even on a gloomy day like today, and see the beauty that God created all around us, but when we look at each other or we look in a mirror, we fail to do the same thing? Today, we're going to take a look at acceptance and how we can start accepting each other the way God accepts us. You know, we were created in the image of God and we're loved by God. And because we were all created in his image, every person we encounter is an opportunity to see God. And to do this, we're going to have to let two things into our lives: empathy and compassion. We're going to start with empathy, or was I what you expected? Now, so often we hear about somebody going through something, whether we read about it or hear about it from someone else, and we think, oh, that's horrible. That really sucks. And then we go about our day. Or we read on Facebook and we hit one of those little buttons on the bottom, the little heart or the little hug face or whatever it is, and then we just keep on scrolling. We're sympathetic, but that's the thing about sympathy. Sympathy will send you a card or a meal and then go on about its day. Sympathy hits the response button on Facebook or says, I'm praying for you, and then keeps scrolling. But empathy goes beyond that. It moves from sympathy into this thing called solidarity. It allows us to truly see the needs of others and not just understand them, but share in what it is they're going through. It doesn't keep scrolling. Empathy stops. And like we see in John 1:14, empathy means we're willing to do something else. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. We saw the glory with our own eyes, like the one-of-a-kind glory, like Father, like Son, generous inside and out, true from start to finish. Now, I chose the Message translation of this verse because of what it says. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. Jesus went to where God's people were, and he didn't have to. He didn't have to become part of the neighborhood. He could have watched from afar and chosen not to get involved. He could have said the same things that you and I say. Oh, that's too bad. Oops. Hate it for him. All right, on to the next thing. But he didn't do that. Jesus chose to enter into the neighborhood, to go where God's children were, so he could truly see what was going on. Not just watch, but see. So he could see the anger, the depravity, the guilt, all the things. And once he saw it, Jesus became it. Because once he became it, he felt what God's children felt. He experienced what they were experiencing. And then he became responsible for it. He did this because Jesus knew that distance creates distortion. You know, it's easy to watch and not actually see. And Jesus didn't do that because that's not what love does. Love steps out of a place of comfort and enters into the neighborhood. It asks questions out of curiosity. And it's not the type of curiosity that's there to criticize and critique, but the kind that seeks to truly understand. It's easy to watch from afar and say, they should have done this. They should have done that. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. Distance creates that distortion. And if we want to see God's people for who they really are, we're going to have to get close. We're going to have to trade criticism for curiosity. And we're going to have to step away from the comfort of our watchtowers and step into the nitty-gritty mess of the neighborhoods. It's easy to hate from a distance, but everything changes when you're willing to get close. There's an author and a speaker. She's actually a pastor with the Salvation Army, and her name's Danielle Strickland. And a few years ago, I was able to see her at a conference, and she spoke about this encounter she had with a Muslim girl. She was seated next to her on a plane, and like often happens when you're seated next to a stranger on a plane, awkward conversation starts. And it was during this awkward conversation that a connection between her and this girl happened. And it led to the girl asking 2 questions that Danielle said would change the course of how she saw people forever. The first question was, would you like to see my face? The answer was an obvious and resounding yes. She lifted her burqa, and she was glorious, 16 and smiling, with dimples and freckles and a mischievous glint in her eye. I took her in. Then she asked the second question. Was I what you were expecting? The question took my breath away because the answer was obvious and complicated at the same time. You weren't what I was expecting, but then again, what was I expecting? The only images of religious Muslims I had seen in those post-9/11 days were men with beards and machetes. She was so far from those depictions that my imagination would be transformed, and my image of who Muslims are would be permanently and positively changed. You see, when I beheld Asma that day, I beheld God, and God beheld me. Ever since that occasion, I often imagine people covered with their figurative burqas, shame, guilt, fear, rejection, inviting us to see them. And when we do finally see them, getting a glimpse of what God looks like. You see, when God looks out and he sees his children, he sees beauty and wonder. He sees past stereotypes. He sees past our sin and our guilt and our shame. And he sees purpose and promise. He doesn't discount the things we're feeling. He holds them close. In Psalm 56:8, we read, "You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You've recorded each one in your book." God feels what we're feeling, and he takes it to heart. He bears the burdens with his children and for his children. And guys, he wants us to do the same with each other, to look past our problems and differences and step into each other's shoes to understand. And throughout the Gospels, we see Jesus do this time and time again. We've heard the story of the adulterous woman. Here she is, this woman who's caught in adultery. And the men bring her before Jesus, and they're trying to, trip him up. And they're like, "Hey, Jesus, this woman was caught in adultery. The law says we're to stone her. What do you want us to do?" And Jesus takes a moment and kind of doodles in the sand, and, they're goading him. "Jesus, what do you want us to do?" And Jesus says, "You know what? You're right. That is what the law says. But let it be you who is without sin to cast the first stone." In that moment, Jesus leveled the playing field. And one by one, the men went away. And he goes to the woman and he says, "Did any of your accusers condemn you?" And she says, "No." He says, "Neither do I. So go, sin no more." Jesus didn't have to respond to the woman that way. He knew the law, and he knew she was guilty, but he also knew something else. He knew who this woman was, not just what she had done. He could see who she was and see beyond her sin. He knew she wasn't someone that was hopeless, but someone who could be redeemed. When Jesus said, "Neither do I," he said to her, "I see you, I feel you, and I know there is more to you than this. And you don't have to bear this burden alone." Let's go back old school a minute. How many of you guys had to read the Scarlet Letter in high school? Yeah? I was supposed to read it too. I'm pretty sure I did the Cliff Notes version of it, which I don't even know if those exist. And I don't remember a lot of it. But I do remember the main character was caught in adultery, just like this woman that we talked about. And she had to wear the scarlet letter A on her chest so that everybody knew what she did. So everyone could look at her and say, "You're an adulteress. I know what you've done." Think about this. What if I had our graders pass out Sharpies and told you to get to writing? Start writing out what it is you've done. Would there be any clear arms in this room? Probably not. But are those things that we have done who we are? No. And if I were to flip this script and said, "Hey, those of you who are perfect, I'm going to give you a bright purple letter P to put on your chest," there wouldn't be a monogram in this room. You see, at the end of the day, we're all alike. We're a lot more alike than we think. Now, if you were to look at my phone at any time of day, probably right now, in fact, you would see a text alert for a group called Lightning Rods. And I don't know the exact science behind it, but I do know a lightning rod is usually placed somewhere on a building to protect it from lightning. And what happens is the lightning is attracted to the rod, and so it takes the brunt of what's going to happen away from the building. What if you and I acted like lightning rods for one another? These two women who are my lightning rods, they're my best friends. We'll call them Kathy and Susan, and we'll call them that because that's their names. Now, Kathy and Susan, they do this for me. They take on the brunt of my burdens so I don't have to do it alone. They look past my faults, and they love me anyway. They look past our differences, and at the end of the day, we're really different. Susan is all about recycling. I'm lucky if I remember to put things in the trash. Kathy can save the world with a spreadsheet. I hate numbers and spreadsheets. And yet, God brought the three of us together in this crazy mess. And if you look around and you think about it, we've all had those lightning rods in our life. Those people who God has placed beside us to take the brunt, to take on the burdens with us. Those people who love us, not because of what we've done, but because of who we are. And they look to us and see us for who we are. And they love us where we are and how we are. And God does that for all of his children. Why can't we do it for each other? If we're going to do that, we're going to have to step into the neighborhood with each other. We're going to have to open ourselves up to asking and understanding. We're going to have to ask, "Hey, what is it like to be you? And what do you think it's like to be me?" And now that we've had this conversation, how do you and I come together and understand one another so we can walk this road together? At my last church, there was this woman who'd been going to church there for a long time, and I didn't know much about her. I knew that she came to church dressed more for the club than the church. I knew what other people within the church had told me about her. She walked with a limp, she talked a little slurred, and people's opinions of her wasn't very high. And just about every weekend, she would come to me and say, "Michele, I want to serve with the kids." And to be honest with you, I was hesitant because based on what I'd been told about her, this wasn't somebody that I wanted with the kids. So one Sunday rolled along, and it had been a super crazy day in kids ministry. Babies were crying, toddlers were puking. I broke up a fist fight between a brother and sister while I was teaching. Sounds like fun, right? And all I wanted to do was get away for a minute. So I went to the lobby of the church because I figured no one would be out there. Church was in. I sat down on a bench next to our church secretary, Beth, and this woman comes out, and she sits beside me and says, "Hey, can I ask you a question, Michele?" I wasn't in the mood for anyone to ask me a question, but being polite, I said, "Sure, why not?" And she looks me square in the eye and says, "How do I know God is real?" Beth, who had been sitting next to me, got up faster than any person I'd ever seen. And I was just sitting there going, "Really, God, we're going to do this right now?" And so to buy myself some time, I said, "Hey, I don't know you that well. Can you tell me your story?" And she started to tell me her story. When she was just an infant, she was diagnosed with a rare form of brain cancer. Most babies don't survive. She was told she wouldn't, and she did. At 3 years old, reeling with the effects of this tumor, the doctors told her parents that she would never walk, talk, or be a contributing member of society. And yet here she was. And as she spoke and told me her story, I wept. Not because I felt sorry for her, because in that moment, I finally saw who she was. And it wasn't what people had told me. In that moment, I could feel what she felt. And I could see that she was beautiful. And I answered her question that day the only way I knew how. You want to know how I know there's a God? Because I see him in you. Every person we meet is an opportunity for us to see God. We just have to be willing to open our eyes, step into the neighborhood, and get to the nitty-gritty with them. Empathy might not change the other person, but it will change you. And that's the best place to start. Because when we get to that place where we can have empathy for others, we get to this place where we're led to act by compassion. And that leads us to our next topic, compassion. Who will be your nuns on the side of the road? That got your attention, didn't it? So if you look up the word compassion, you'll see that it means to ache from the inside for someone else. And if you really want to go old school, you can look up the Greek word for it, which I'm totally going to mess up, splanchnomai. And if you look that word up, the definition is this: to have the bowels yearn. You know what your bowels are, right? So I was talking to a friend of mine about this sermon, and I brought that up to him, and he says, "Yeah, that sounds exactly how I feel after I have my first cup of coffee in the morning." But joking aside, compassion really is being moved at a gut level to do something, to respond to another's pain or bliss in a way that helps promote or ease their suffering and allows them to flourish. It involves something that we experience inside of ourselves, and it makes us act outside of ourselves. In Matthew 9, verses 35 through 37, we read, Jesus traveled through all the towns and villages of that area, teaching in the synagogues and announcing the good news about the kingdom. And he healed every kind of disease and illness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And he said to his disciples, "The harvest is great, but the workers are few." You and I are the workers. And every day we throw away the harvest. We throw it away when we ignore that feeling inside us to act. We throw it away when we said, "I could help them, but they're only going to go off and do this." We throw it away when we say, "They aren't my problem." And we throw it away when we ignore what it is that's breaking our hearts, close our eyes, and walk away. Compassion isn't easy. First of all, compassion interrupts. And time again in the Gospels, we see this, where Jesus is doing one thing, but compassion interrupts him and drives him to do another. In Mark 6, we hear about how Jesus and the disciples were teaching, and they'd been working so hard and so long doing ministry that they hadn't even gotten a chance to eat. And Jesus says to his disciples, hey, you know what? Let's go find a place to rest. Let's just take a moment, get some me time. Moms, have you guys ever felt that way? Had those moments where you're so physically and emotionally exhausted that you're like, please, someone take this kid from me before I give him away? Jesus needed some me time. And so he and the disciples headed off to do that. And Mark 6:32-34 continues, so they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw the crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. So this crowd shows up, and Jesus, instead of saying, hey guys, glad you're here, but I need some me time, he's moved by compassion. He knows he has to do something. So he starts teaching them. Because that's what you do when compassion compels you and interrupts you. You do something and you act. Jesus interrupted his me time and said, you know what? I'm going to go and I'm going to serve them. Some of you guys know my ex-husband, Shane. Shane and I met when I was a senior in high school. He already worked for Union Pacific. He was on what was called a construction gang. So 1 to 2 weeks at a time, he would be gone. And Shane knew right away about me. My love language is quality time. So he knew when he got back in town, he was going to have to give me quality time. So one Friday rolls around, he had called that morning, said, I'll be back in town around 6. I'll pick you up at 7. The clock rolls around, no Shane. 7:30 rolls around, no Shane. 8 rolls around, no Shane. 8:30 rolls around, I put my pajamas on, take off my makeup, I'm done. He shows up a little bit after that, and my dad answers the door, just kind of shaking his head at him, like, boy, you are in trouble. And he comes to me, and he's like, you're never going to believe this, but there were these nuns on the side of the road. And my mom mutters something in Vietnamese, I'm guessing wasn't so good, and my dad just starts cracking up laughing, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, as he was driving and got closer to our hometown, there's this little town called Altus, Arkansas, and there's lots of vineyards there. And apparently that's where the nuns from the convent, St. Scholastica, would go to get their grapes, because apparently they made their own wine. And as Shane was driving, he saw this truck on the side of the road loaded up with crates, billowing with smoke, and these nuns standing outside beside it. And Shane said, there's just some tests that God give you that you don't fail. And nuns on the side of the road are one of them. Now, this story has been told within our families many times. Our boys know it and they love it. But the thing Shane will actually tell you about this was it had nothing to do with the nuns on the side of the road. What happened in that moment is Shane saw people who needed help. He saw women that could have been his mom or grandmother or aunt, and that's what compelled him to stop. He knew it was interrupting him getting to my house, but he needed to stop and help those people because those people were essentially his people. And you know what? Compassion costs us. Being moved to act is going to cost you something. That day, for Shane, it cost him having a girlfriend who was happy with him and also cost him the cost of a bouquet of flowers that I got later that week. But he did it anyway. And if I'm going to be honest with you, in the 20 plus years that I've known, compassion has cost him a lot because he's always stopped. It's cost him dinners. It's cost him getting to football games and soccer games on time. It's cost him sleep, money. It's even cost him friendships But there was never a time where he didn't act. Never a time when he didn't allow compassion to interrupt, to cost him. And for all that compassion costs us, it changes so much. You know, everywhere that Jesus went, he was compelled by compassion. And for Jesus, that compassion ultimately meant costing him his life. And that changed everything for us. Everything. That compassion that cost Jesus his life not only changed our lives, but gave us all life. Every single one of us. This is how much God loved the world. He gave his son, his one and only son. And this is why. So that no one be destroyed. By believing in him, anyone can have a whole and lasting life. His compassion gave us acceptance. And the same acceptance that he lavishes on us is what he wants us to lavish on each other. We go back to the Great Commission, or the Great Commandment. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. You can't get more old school than that. Love God and love others. The gospel is love your neighbor. And if you want to know who is your neighbor, the answer is yes. I'm going to ask AJ to go ahead and make his way to the stage for our closing song. And I want to share one more photo with you. It's this. So it's a tweet, and it says, last week Bob Goff accidentally posted my personal cell number on Twitter. For 2.5 hours, I was Bob Goff, and it was amazing. The number of texts and calls was incredible. I should do that more often on my own. The ministry of availability. Now, if you don't know who Bob Goff is, go Google him when you leave here. He's like this amazing speaker and author and just like all around good human. And he puts his personal cell phone number out in public. He publishes it in his books. He tweets it. He puts it where people can see it. And he answers the calls. And he does it because he understands that entering into a conversation with someone can be the act of compassion that they need. It can change somebody's life. Yes, it interrupts his day. Yes, it cost him his time. But he does it anyway. And if you want to know someone else who is great at this, he's sitting right here. It's Craig. Time and time again, I have seen him care for others through the ministry of availability and acceptance. His phone rings in meetings, and he answers it. I know he's been headed to lacrosse games for his kids, and he answers. It interrupts him, and it costs him. And he does it time and time again, because that's what compassion does. As AJ and I close today, I want you to think about this. What would change for you if you went old school? What would it look like if you allowed empathy and compassion to be what drives you? What would it look like if you allowed accepting others the way God accepts us to be how you lived your life? What would it cost you? And what would it be worth?
Look down from the broken sky, traced out by city lights, a mile road from a mile high, a best seat in the house tonight, a touchdown on the cold black top, hold on for the sudden stop, breathing the familiar shock of confusion and chaos, and all those people going somewhere. Why have I never cared?
Father, I'm so tired. Tired of trying to keep up. Tired of chasing after images in my head of who others think I should be. And I'm tired of creating images in my head of who I think others should be. Father, today I seek your rest. Rest for my weary body, for it's tired of running, tired of chasing. Rest for my weary mind, for it's tired of thinking. Rest for my weary soul, for it longs for something more than this, more than the images I chase.
So give me your eyes for just 1 second. Give me your eyes so I can see everything that I keep missing. Give me your love for humanity, and give me your arms for the broken-hearted, the ones far beyond my reach. Give me your heart for the ones forgotten. Give me your eyes so I can see, yeah.
Father, help me to look and see who it is I am to you. See the child you created in your image. See the one you deem worthy of your son's life. See the one you deem worthy of eternal life. Father, help me to look and see who they are to you. See your children. See the ones you created in your image. See the ones you deem worthy of your son's life, and see the ones you deem worthy of eternal life. Just like me. Just like me. Just like me.
Stepped out on a busy street, see a girl and our eyes meet. Does her best to smile at me, to hide what's underneath. There's a man just to her right, a black suit and a bright red tie. Too ashamed to tell his wife he's out of work, he's buying time, and all those people going somewhere. Why have I never cared?
Father, help me to love like your son, without what ifs, without but onlys, without hesitation, fear, or discrimination of myself and of others. Father, instead of chasing images of perfection, I want to feel the reality of my brother's cry, feel the reality of my sister's plea, feel the reality of who I am with you, because the part is too much a burden to bear.
So give me your eyes for just 1 second. Give me your eyes so I can see everything that I keep missing. Give me your love for humanity, and give me your arms for the broken-hearted, the ones that are far beyond my reach. Give me your heart for the ones forgotten. Give me your eyes so I can see, yeah.
Father, help me to feel and then do. Do what I can to show them your love through my love, so that there will no longer be a them and a me, but only an us. Your children together, us. Amen.